In Ecuador, indigenous movements and representatives of Guillermo Lazo's government began talks in search of a solution to the social crisis in the country. The Peruvian government has declared a state of emergency nationwide in all highways and roads due to the indefinite strike of transporters and farmers. Also in Sudan, authorities accuse the Ethiopian army of executing 7 of its soldiers and a civilian. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. In Ecuador, on the 15th day of the indefinite national strike, demonstrators from the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities, Conaie, held talks with the 5 branches of the government at the Basilica Church. Government Minister Francisco Jimenez attended the meeting on behalf of President Guillermo Lazo. At the meeting, the leader of the Indigenous Confederation, Leonidas Issa, listed the issues that have prompted the mobilizations nationwide. Issa also asked the government representatives to comply with the 10 demands made. Also at the meeting, indigenous and civil organization leaders underscored that all demonstrations have been peaceful. The Peruvian government has declared a state of emergency nationwide in all highways and roads due to the indefinite strike of transporters and farmers. The state of emergency is expected to remain in force for the next 30 days. Meanwhile, the police is trying to keep the situation in control under all the country. Transport unions started a national strike in protest for the increase in the fuel prices. On their part, farmers will also be going on strike, demanding that the government addresses a series of demands, and they are questioning the executive for failing to carry out an agrarian reform. Peru's President Pedro Castillo will not receive an audit commission at the government palace. Castillo claims they do not comply with the guarantees of a fair process. The president's lawyer, Benji Espinosa, said that the parliamentary commission investigating the Zarratea case is not acting objectively, considering that the entity only aims at bringing charges against the head of state. He also warned that the commission had informed that it will present its final report this Wednesday without considering President Castillo's statements. The lawyer recalled finally that he and refer working group did not deliver the elements of conviction or evidence that they allegedly have in the case. From Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro Moros announced a new reapproachment with the United States government during the presentation of the Simón Bolívar 2022 National Journalism Award in its 80th edition. On the occasion of the 204th anniversary of the first publication in 1818 of the newspaper Correo del Orinoco, founded by the liberator Simón Bolívar as an artillery of thought to combat the imperialist Spanish press. The Venezuelan president reported on the arrival of the country of the delegation sent by the government of the United States with a view to continuing the talks on the bilateral agenda that began last March.
An important delegation from the United States government arrived in Venezuela 2 hours ago, and it is currently working to follow up on the talks that began on March the 5th. And to continue with the bilateral agenda between the government of the United States and the government of Venezuela. I spoke with the President of the Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, who at this time, exactly at this time, is meeting with the delegation. And we continue discussing several issues.
In Brazil, according to the latest polls, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva leads the voting intention for the presidential elections of October. According to a new survey by the Research Institute for Results Communication, Lula has 43% voting intentions, while his main opponent, President Jair Bolsonaro, obtained 33% of support among those interviewed. The study also revealed that Lula will be tied, considering the margin of error of 2 percentage points, with the sum of all the other pre-candidates, which will guarantee him a victory in the first round. Authorities in Mexico report that at least 6 police officers were killed and 4 others were wounded on Sunday after being attacked by a group of armed men in the northern state of Nuevo León. Nuevo León Defense Secretary Samuel Garcia said that the confrontation occurred in the early hours of Sunday morning, when local police officers responded to an attack by unknown men in armored vans. The assailants outnumbered the police. Police sources said it is still unknown whether those involved in the attack belong to any criminal gang. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said in his morning briefing before the press this Monday that the authorities have identified a group of criminals. He condemned their actions and said the investigation is still underway. Thousands of Haitians marched in support of former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide and demanded he take the reins of the increasingly troubled Caribbean country. Demonstrators held leafy green branches, and some had the Haitian flag and pictures of Aristide as they walked peacefully through the capital of Port-au-Prince and denounced a spike in violence, a deepening economic crisis, and the worsening struggles that many in the country of more than 11 million people are facing after the killing of President Jovenel Moise back in July. The march came as the Prime Minister Ariel Henry met with civil society leaders and others in an attempt to stabilize the country and hold general elections. In the United States, an Amtrak train with 243 passengers derailed on Monday in the state of Missouri. The train was heading from Los Angeles to Chicago at the time of the accident, when several cars derailed after colliding with a garbage truck at a public crossing. Police reports indicated that 3 people lost their lives and there were multiple injuries among some 200 passengers. Authorities deployed a rescue operation to help the rest of the passengers. This accident occurs one day after another Amtrak train collided with a car in California, leaving 3 people dead. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Authorities of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic reported on Monday that the remains of 172 Ukrainian soldiers were found at the Azovstal steel plant. The finding is in addition to the discovery of the remains of the Ukrainian servicemen buried in the Petrovsky Park in Mariupol during the liberation of the city on May 20th. The prosecutor's office also said that investigators, together with the Russian Investigation Committee, found a list of those buried on the site, which allowed to identify them. The prosecutor's office also pointed out that the Ministries of Emergency Situations and Internal Affairs of Donetsk continue to examine the city of Mariupol's territory. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia will export gold to other markets despite plans by G7 leaders of banning its trade. According to Peskov, the measure will only force to redirect Russia's gold exports to other markets where the product is in high demand and where there are more friendly legal and economic regimes. This decision was prompted by the measure announced this past Sunday, June 26, by several Western leaders who said that the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, and Japan plan to ban imports of Russian gold. The decision was labeled by the Russian authorities as illegitimate. The Russian official recalled that the market of precious metals is a global one, quite wide and diverse, so that this measure will not truly affect Russia. In Germany, the heads of state members of the G7 group met this Sunday to seek a united bloc in support of Ukraine and the consequences of the conflict in eastern Ukraine. The meeting between the leaders will be held until June 28th at Elmau Castle in the Bavarian region, where they will discuss the economic devastation caused by the war in Ukraine, the food crisis, as well as the climate change. In the framework of the meeting, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, announced new sanctions against Russia. Countries such as Germany, Canada, the United States, France, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, which make up the group, are seeking to strengthen the bloc's maneuvers to counteract China and Russia. Hundreds of protesters marched in Germany near where leaders of the G7 are meeting, demanding action on climate change. Also, demonstrators demanded that the G7 countries fulfill their responsibilities and become more active in tackling climate change and global hunger, among other issues. Protesters said the world's problems cannot be solved by the world's 7 largest industrialized economies alone. They can only be truly solved through platforms such as the United Nations. Under the banner reading Global Justice, Saving Climate Instead of Arming, several speakers addressed the crowd of protesters calling for more action to fight climate change.
The leaders of the 7 most powerful Western nations, but the decisions they make are of concern for the whole population of all countries in the world. And the countries that suffer most from the politics of the G7 are not sitting on the same table.
The government of France requested that Venezuela and Iran be allowed to return to the oil market in order to stop the increase in fuel prices at a global level. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, requested during the G7 Leaders Summit that both nations be able to return to the market, while he asked the countries that supply the international oil market to increase their production exceptionally. The objective of the French government will be to put a brake on the continuous rise in fuel prices in the last months as a consequence of the restrictions imposed by the West on the Russian oil. Venezuela and Iran are central to world oil production, and in recent years they have been affected by the economic sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies. And the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, will massively increase the number of high response forces to more than 300,000 troops. Jens Stoltenberg, the organization's Alliance Secretary General, announced that NATO will decide to increase the Rapid Reaction Force, which currently numbers about 40,000 troops and provides operational support for the military group's operations. Stoltenberg previously stressed that NATO summit in Madrid will adopt a new security concept, where Russia will be recognized as a threat and not as a partner of the organization.
We will transform the NATO response force and increase the number of our high readiness forces to well over 300,000.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The government of Sudan accused the Ethiopian army of executing 7 of its soldiers and 1 civilian and described the acts as cowardly. The Sudanese army officially reported that the soldiers were captured in an area near the disputed border of Al-Fashaga. Military authorities stated that this action, which violates all conventions of war and the international law, will not be overlooked. The dispute over fertile lands in the state of Khartoum in East Sudan is one of long-standing and has been the cause of clashes for years between both the East and African nations.
Statement issued Sunday night. Ethiopia did not immediately comment on the accusations. According to a Sudanese, Sudan has accused the Ethiopian army of executing 7.
Young and old, men and women, authorities and traditional chiefs paid their respects to the coffin of Patrice Lumumba in Kinshasa, the last stage of this memorial pilgrimage that retracted the life of the hero of the independence of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lumumba's only surviving remains, a single tooth, arrived in Kinshasa on Monday, where it is due to be laid to rest later this week. The nationalist politician became an anti-colonial icon when he delivered a fiery speech against racism on June 30th, 1960, when his native Central African country proclaimed independence from Belgium. Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi received the remains at Kinshasa's International Airport. Lumumba's tooth is due to be laid to rest in a ceremony in Kinshasa on Thursday, the 62nd anniversary of the independence from Belgium, and his historic speech.
I have great joy This morning, since 6 o'clock, we were at the airport to welcome our Prime Minister, our national hero of Congo.
With my brothers and sisters, we fulfilled a duty that we had to fulfill for a very long time. The duty of children is to bury their parents so that their soul can rest in peace. And it took a long time, but finally we did it.
On Monday, authorities reported that 10 people were killed and more than 200 injured in a toxic gas explosion in Jordan's Aqaba airport. Footage on state TV showed a large cylinder plunging from a crane on a moored vessel, causing a violent release of yellow gas. Nearby areas were evacuated and residents told to stay indoors. According to the state media, Prime Minister British Kazaweh and Interior Minister Mazen Al-Furaya headed to the site to the accident. Civil Defense spokesperson Amr al-Sartawi earlier reported that 234 people were injured after the tank filled with toxic gas fell. Jordan's Aqaba port is the country's only marine terminal and a key transit point for a vast portion of its imports and exports. The government of Iran submitted an application for BRICS membership. The Iranian Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh informed that with their entry into the group, they will create an economic and commercial alliance of nations together with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Khatibzadeh indicated that the decision was welcomed by Moscow while expressing the need to establish requirements for the new members. Likewise, the Russian presidential advisor Yuri Ushakov stated that it is necessary to define the procedures and requirements for the possible candidates to join the BRICS groups. And now we move on to other topics. Authorities in northwest Turkey worked on Monday to evacuate stranded locals after heavy rains caused rivers to overflow and bridges to collapse. Turkey's Emergency and Disaster Authority, AFAD, said more than 2,550 personnel were deployed in 6 provinces affected by the heavy rains and dozens have been evacuated. Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said there were no reports of deaths or missing people. Floods in 3 northwestern provinces last August killed 82 people. The Nicaraguan Institute of Territorial Studies, INITER, informed that they are following up on a tropical disturbance in the North Atlantic. Authorities indicated that they are maintaining communication with international monitoring centers to follow the evolution of this meteorological phenomenon. Officials explained that the tropical depression was been advancing across the Atlantic Ocean since it formed last week.
We would like to refer now to the existence of a tropical disturbance that was formed since Thursday last week in the waters of the tropical northern Atlantic Ocean. This disturbance has been moving along the Atlantic Ocean. It still remains over the Atlantic Ocean, and we're monitoring it very closely to the evolution and future trajectory of the system. Our teams of specialists are very attentive to the evolution of the system, very attentive to the information and communication with international monitoring centers.
So we have come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.